for Canadians here in the United States, the first 6 months of President Donald Trump's second term have left many feeling like outsiders, in some cases like an adversary on American soil.
Donald Trump sees negotiation as domination. In his second term, that mindset hasn't changed, especially when it comes to Canada. He slammed tariffs on their steel, aluminum, and cars. He demanded obedience. He mocked them on camera. And when Canada pushed back with a digital tax, he shut down all trade talks in response. Then Canada blinked on the surface. They canceled the tax. Trump declared victory. But beneath that win was a storm quietly forming, because this wasn't just about taxes. It was about Trump's style of diplomacy and how it's starting to backfire in ways he didn't anticipate.
We have a lot of supporters in the United States, including in the steel and aluminum industry, people who buy our steel and aluminum. So we're not playing, despite what Mr. Trump says, we actually have cards in our deck.
The Trump doctrine is simple: apply pressure until the other side cracks. Whether it's China, Europe, or Canada, the playbook rarely changes. In Canada's case, he hit hard. After months of rising tensions, he threatened new tariffs and a Section 301 probe unless Ottawa dropped its digital tax. And when Prime Minister Carney finally did, Trump made no secret of his dominance. There was no concession in return. The tariffs up to 50% on steel and autos remained. The U.S. still treats Canada as a trade threat, not a trusted partner. For Trump, it was mission accomplished. But that approach, bold, brash, and one-sided, is leaving behind more than headlines. It's leaving bruises. And now those bruises are becoming backlash. Trump thrives on loud gestures. Carney, by contrast, plays the long game. After the tax was withdrawn, Canada didn't erupt in protest. There were no angry statements or dramatic walkouts. Instead, Ottawa re-entered the talks quietly, but with purpose. Their target, not just a resumption of trade, but relief from the very tariffs that triggered this conflict. Canada knows what it's doing. Their economy may be smaller, but their position in U.S. supply chains, especially in metals and autos, is significant, and they've begun leveraging it behind closed doors. Former diplomat Colin Robertson called it a shrewd move. The tax had to go eventually, but by timing it precisely, Carney made it look like a concession while keeping the bigger cards in play. The goal now is strategic. Reshape the relationship, not just patch it. In this way, Trump's hardball tactics haven't shattered Canadian resistance. They've deepened it and forced it underground. Canadians in the U.S. who spoke with CTV News say Trump's looming foreign policy has cast a shadow of doubt on their future abroad. While Carney stays quiet, the emotional impact of Trump's style is loud, especially among Canadians living in the U.S. Many now say they feel like outsiders. Some fear crossing the border, others worry about being detained or denied entry even with green cards. In families with U.S.-born children, there's anxiety about being separated. This isn't just about policy anymore. It's personal. Trump's foreign policy has recast Canada not as an ally but as an adversary to pressure, and Canadians are noticing. This Canada Day, the White House said nothing. There was no recognition of shared values or partnership. The silence felt deliberate, and it confirmed what many already felt, that the old friendship is cracking. The trade talks may continue. A deal may even be signed, but the damage Trump is doing through his diplomacy may be harder to undo. By treating Canada like a rival to conquer rather than a partner to respect, he's triggered a shift. Slow, steady, but unmistakable. A new national pride is rising in Canada, a new skepticism is taking hold, and a new kind of resistance is forming. Not loud, but lasting. Because in diplomacy, winning the battle isn't enough, especially when your victories come at the cost of trust.
We've been screwed by Canada.
But Trump's anger at the trading relationship goes way back. One of the earliest beefs of his first term over Canada's dairy industry.
Going up to 400%. You never hear that. Canada's absolutely one of the worst.
It started with a number, 270%, then 300, then 4. President Donald Trump has long accused Canada of slapping sky-high tariffs on American dairy. But in late June 2025, the rhetoric escalated. Trump abruptly cut off trade negotiations with Ottawa, blaming Canada's dairy system and a digital tax as proof that America was once again being ripped off. But behind the headlines and hard talk lies a deeper conflict. This wasn't just about tariffs. It wasn't even just about milk. It was about two competing visions of economic sovereignty, and the people paying for it were dairy farmers on both sides of the border.
representatives. Canada has been ripping us off for years. 250% tariff, which is taking advantage of our farmers.
Trump's obsession with Canadian dairy didn't begin in 2025. It dates back to the earliest days of his first term. Even then, he called supply management a disgrace and forced Canada to concede 3.6% of its market access during USMCA renegotiations in 2018. But that wasn't enough. By 2020, and again during his re-election in 2024, Trump revived the issue, railing against tariffs of 270%, 298%, even 400%. Technically, some of those figures appear in Canada's tariff schedule, but they only apply when imports exceed tariff rate quotas, caps set on duty-free volumes. Here's the catch. Those caps are almost never met. According to Global Affairs Canada, most U.S. dairy imports into Canada, including yogurt, cheese, and buttermilk, fall well below quota limits. In 2024, for example, Canada allowed 3.5 million kilograms of yogurt to be imported tariff-free, yet importers used only 12% of that allowance. Still, Trump doesn't care about quotas. For him, Canada's supply management system with its controlled prices and guaranteed income represents everything he's vowed to tear down.
Well, the uncertainty is killing us, and it's hurting American business, it's hurting Canadian business.
Even before Trump's June 27th decision to cancel trade talks, the pressure on farmers had already been building and the fallout has since accelerated. In the U.S., dairy producers had grown dependent on the Canadian market, which accounts for nearly 40% of North American dairy exports according to USDA trade data. Without clarity, buyers pulled back. The Bullvine reported a price drop of $1.70 per 100 pounds of milk, pushing some producers into negative margins. Surplus stock ballooned. Government aid, just $85 million, covered barely 7% of estimated losses. In Canada, farmers faced a different kind of crisis. While supply management cushioned them from falling prices, the export uncertainty caused backlogs. Processors cut production lines, especially for high-volume products like ultra-filtered milk. Ottawa rushed out a 6.5 billion Canadian relief package, but for many rural communities, it wasn't enough. Across both countries, analysts put the total losses from dairy disruptions at over 1.2 billion US and rising.
He's attacking Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot let him succeed.
For the Canadian government, supply management is non-negotiable. In recent interviews, ministers close to him reiterated, Canada already compromised under USMCA. It would not surrender more, especially under pressure. But Trump has ramped up the heat. He's now tying dairy to national security, invoking fentanyl and border control as justifications for new tariffs. Officials in Ottawa dismissed the rationale, citing law enforcement cooperation and RCMP compliance. Canada's provincial leaders, acting independently but in coordination with Ottawa, have escalated their response. British Columbia has floated fees on U.S. commercial trucks. Ontario has considered a 25% electricity surcharge. Alberta, long skeptical of federal mandates, has joined a Team Canada front. The message is simple. Canada won't trade milk for metals or energy. Dairy makes up just 0.1% of all U.S.-Canada trade according to Statistics Canada. But it carries massive political weight. For Trump, it's leverage, a symbol of unfair deals. For Carney, it's identity, a pillar of rural stability. For farmers, it's not a symbol. It's their life. Trump may think tariffs are beautiful, but for thousands of families in Wisconsin, Quebec, and Alberta, this is starting to feel like a disaster. And unless leaders find a path forward, soon the next casualty of this trade war won't be numbers. It'll be trust.
He has for a long time been fixated on dairy farmers in Canada. And he thinks the Canadian government is protecting a relatively small number of dairy farmers in Canada by putting, tariffs and quotas on U.S. dairy.
In most places, a glass of milk is just a drink. But between the United States and Canada, it has become a symbol of something much bigger. A growing trade rift, simmering political tensions, and two very different visions of economic sovereignty. At the heart of the conflict is Canada's dairy supply management system. This system sets strict quotas on production and imposes tariffs as high as 300% on imports that exceed those limits. It's designed to protect Canadian farmers, ensuring stable prices and domestic food security. And here's my problem with Canada. Canada was meant to be the 51st state because we subsidize Canada by $200 billion a year. Under the USMCA, successor to NAFTA, Canada agreed to open a portion of its dairy market to American producers through tariff-free quotas. But U.S. officials argue that the way these quotas are allocated makes it almost impossible for American companies to actually benefit. Quotas are being granted to Canadian-owned processors, they claim, locking U.S. suppliers out of the market by design. What was supposed to be a technical adjustment to level the playing field has become a source of frustration, mistrust, and ultimately retaliation. In response to what it sees as unfair treatment, the U.S. government imposed broad tariffs on Canadian goods targeting not just dairy but also lumber, aluminum, and steel.
Deal with is Canada. The people that, now this was Trudeau, the people that good old Justin, I call him Governor Trudeau, his people were nasty. And they weren't telling the truth. They never told the truth. You know that, they'd say, well, we don't charge. Well, they do. They charge tremendous. They charge tremendous.
Then came another flashpoint. Canada's 3% digital services tax aimed at large multinational tech firms operating in the Canadian market, most of which are American. Washington condemned the move, calling it discriminatory and retaliatory, arguing that it unfairly targets U.S.-based companies like Google, Amazon, and Meta. The reaction was swift. Canada defended the tax as a matter of digital fairness, while the U.S. escalated pressure by threatening to pull out of ongoing trade talks. In the face of rising tensions, Canada rolled out a $6.5 billion Canadian support package to help offset losses for its producers. At the same time, Ottawa introduced the One Canadian Economy Act, a plan to unify its fragmented domestic market by removing interprovincial trade barriers, ensuring internal economic resilience in case U.S. exports decline further. At this stage, the conflict had clearly evolved beyond dairy.
We find that they're charging us over 200% for dairy products. You know about that. And when I left, we had that well taken care of, but under Biden, they just kept raising it. Very difficult to deal with, the Canadian.
The impacts are already being felt on both sides of the border. In Canada, public sentiment has hardened. Social media campaigns calling for the boycott of American products have gone viral. Supermarkets have begun pulling U.S. dairy and meat products off shelves. South of the border, American dairy farmers in key states like Wisconsin and Minnesota are facing severe losses. Without access to the Canadian market, millions of gallons of milk are now being dumped or sold at rock-bottom prices. Many family farms are teetering on the edge of financial collapse. Meanwhile, the tech sector is watching closely. If Canada's digital tax survives and succeeds, it could become a model for other countries, potentially triggering a wave of digital taxation across Europe and Asia. That would erode the profitability of American tech exports and create a patchwork of regulatory headaches. Legal experts are also warning that the dispute threatens the long-term viability of the USMCA. If either side brings formal complaints to the WTO or invokes retaliatory clauses, the framework of North American free trade could begin to unravel.
Last night I had a good conversation with President Trump, and we agreed to recommence our negotiations with a view to the 21st of July deadline.
This didn't start as a geopolitical crisis. It started with milk. But trade in the modern world is no longer just about goods crossing borders. It's about values, leverage, and who gets to define the rules of engagement. When partners become rivals and economic tools become weapons, the cost is rarely limited to tariffs and taxes. Trust is broken, markets shift, communities suffer. This isn't just about dairy anymore. It's about what kind of global economy we're building and who gets left behind when it breaks.